It looks like people are still being added, so I'm going to wait a couple of seconds before I start. All right. Bonjour, everyone. Hi, I'm Angela Riley. I'm a law professor at UCLA, and we are delighted to have you here for our webinar. I am so beyond excited to introduce the panel of speakers that we have today. We're just so honored that you all made time to be here with us. I wanted to just start by acknowledging that we're on Tongva land here in Los Angeles. I'm coming to you live from West LA, and thank you all for being present. I usually do short, really short bios of speakers, but this panel of speakers is just so dynamite and so amazing on these incredible Native women that I'm going to give a little bit more information about each of them than I might normally do. So let me start with Representative Sharice Davids. Representative Davids is from the Ho-Chunk Nation. She was sworn into the 116th Congress to serve Kansas' 3rd Congressional District. She became one of the first two Native American women to serve in Congress and the second Native to represent Kansas in Congress. She's currently running for re-election, so make sure you're supporting her campaign to continue to serve Kansas' 3rd Congressional District. Representative Davids graduated from University of Missouri, Kansas City before earning her law degree from Cornell Law School. She's a first-generation college student. Prior to serving in her elected position, Representative Davids served as White House Fellow under President Barack Obama and directed community and economic development for the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation. Thank you, Representative Davids. Next, we have Representative Ruth. Representative Ruth Buffalo is Mandan, Hidatsa, and Arikara. She's currently serving in her first term as North Dakota House State Representative for District 27. She's the first Native Democratic woman elected to the North Dakota legislature. She successfully introduced a package of bills focused on missing and murdered Indigenous people and human trafficking prevention and awareness. Representative Buffalo replaced Randy Boning, I'm not sure I'm saying that right, within the North Dakota legislature, who was the primary sponsor of the voter ID law aimed at disenfranchising Native voters. That's incredible. Representative Buffalo has a bachelor's degree in criminal justice from Setonka University and 3 master's degrees from North Dakota State University. She is originally from Mandaree, North Dakota. She previously served as public health professional and a community organizer. Thank you for being here. Let me go next to Tribal Advisor Christina Snyder, my former student. Christina Snyder is from the Dry Creek Rancheria Band of Pomo Indians and serves as the Tribal Advisor to our Governor, Gavin Newsom, and is Executive Secretary of the Native American Heritage Commission. Advisor Snyder's work focuses primarily on tribal law and policy with experience in tribal tax, economic development, gaming, child welfare, juvenile justice, cultural resource protection, voting rights, and government relations at the state and federal levels. Advisor Snyder received her law degree from the University of California, Los Angeles in 2013, and she served as a law clerk at the Office of Tribal Justice at the U.S. Department of Justice and the Wallapai Court of Appeals, and worked with Washtoyo Foundation, Ventura Coastkeeper as a legal fellow, National Congress of American Indians as a staff attorney, SEBA Legal LLP as of counsel, and Dry Creek Rancheria Band of Pomo Indians as an ICWA representative. We are delighted to have you. I want to go ahead and introduce our 4th speaker. She, I think, might have a conflict, but in case she comes on, I want to make sure we've given her a proper introduction, and that's Senate candidate Paulette Jordan. Paulette Jordan is Coeur d'Alene. She's currently running as the Democratic nominee for the United States Senate for the state of Idaho. In 2018, Ms. Jordan was the Democratic gubernatorial candidate for Idaho, becoming the first woman nominated to the position by a major party in Idaho, and the first Native American woman nominated for governor in U.S. history. More Idahoans cast their votes for Paulette Jordan in 2018 than they had for any Democratic gubernatorial or congressional candidate in Idaho history. She's a graduate of the University of Washington and returned home to Idaho and became the youngest person elected to the Coeur d'Alene Tribal Council. She's worked in business development and served as finance chair and secretary of the executive board of the National Indian Gaming Association. And in 2014, she unseated an incumbent Republican to serve in the Idaho House of Representatives for 2 terms. So hopefully she can join us later in this presentation. I want to take a moment to thank Heather Morphew, who's given enormous administrative support, and then turn it over to my colleague and also former student, Lauren Van Schulfgaard, who's done an amazing job organizing this panel today, and is going to be the moderator. So I will turn it over to you, Lauren, and thank you all.
Thank you, Professor Riley, and thank you to our speakers. We are so excited to dive in. So this is definitely the climax of our Red Rising speaker series that we Zoomified, as everyone has this year, which has provided some really fun opportunities, including for today. The impetus for our Red Rising series is to explore all of the incredibly dynamic ways that political participation impacts and vice versa Indian country. And so today we wanted to explore what political participation looks like outside of the tribal government. Tribes, of course, are denied direct representation in local, state, and national forums, and yet we know that that political participation is incredibly important. It seems only recently that we've had access to really participate in those forums, and we're still very much exploring what that means, including what it means to have women representation. And so having a entirely female panel is both a delight and intentional, and so we're very excited to explore that. So I think before we pepper you all with the million questions that we have and that we warmly invite in the Q&A box, I'd like to turn it over to the speakers to tell us a little bit about yourselves, about your experience, and anything you might want to share with us. So first, I will turn it over to Representative Davids.
Well, thank you. And how amazing. I'm so glad to be here with such an awesome panel of amazing women. So I think because of the kind of nature of what we're talking about here, there's just a couple of things that I want to touch on, and then I'm excited to get to hear from everyone else and then get to the Q&A, because I think that's usually the most fun part. So I appreciate the bio because it helps cut down maybe a little bit on the length of time that I could talk. So I do want to say that you know, I was raised by a single mom who served in the Army for 20 years, which is how Ho-Chunk ends up in Kansas. And, you know, my mom retired while she was stationed at Fort Leavenworth. And so I graduated from Leavenworth High School. And I actually started off as a first generation college student getting an associate's degree at Johnson County Community College, which is in the district that I represent now. And then I went to UMKC, the University of Missouri in Kansas City for my bachelor's degree. And that journey was about 8 years. It took me 4 years to get my associate's and then 4 years to get my bachelor's degree. And also, actually, I've started referring to myself as a former first generation college student because my mom got her bachelor's at UMKC about 3 years ago. And so, yeah, she's, and so I think that, like, one of the reasons that I share the kind of length of time and that I started off at a community college is because I think that, first of all, I feel like I have a pretty ordinary experience. It's not out of the ordinary to be raised by a single parent. It's not uncommon to work while you're in school. It's not uncommon to go to community college. It's not uncommon to take more than 4 years to get a bachelor's degree. And I think all of those things are part of why I was able to connect with so many folks, but it's also part of what we need to see more of in our elected officials, in our decision-making positions, both at the state level and at the federal level. And so I just kind of want to, like, share that piece of the bio, but then I also do want to mention that I got to go to law school at Cornell. Of course, you know, I worked really hard, and it's a lot to apply, but the reason that I even applied to Cornell for law school, because I had only applied to one school, and it was UMKC, where I got my bachelor's. I was comfortable there. My support system is here. My mom is here in Kansas, and so I wanted to stay near my family and my friends. And I went to the Pre-Law Summer Institute at the American Indian Law Center, housed at University of New Mexico. And the experience changed my life. For one, I remember sitting in the classroom with, there were about 30 of us, and looking around and seeing that, first of all, this was the first time I had ever, growing up as an Army brat, I was often the only Native person that someone had met. And so I remember sitting in the classroom and thinking, like, I'm in a classroom full of Native people who are all about to go to law school. And it just felt so profound to me. And the director of the program encouraged me to apply to Cornell. And my first response was, Cornell's not going to take me. And she, of course, kept it real and said, I'm not saying Cornell's going to take you. What I'm saying is you should apply. And if you don't apply, you're the one who's decided that Cornell's not going to take you. And I think that, like, that experience shifted the trajectory of my life. Not getting into Cornell, that did too, of course, but just the idea of applying to a school that I had right off the bat felt like I couldn't get into. And I think that it helped me along the way in some ways having confidence that even if I'm not going to always succeed at stuff, that I should try, and that I have as good a shot as anybody else. And that outlook, I think, is part of what helped me apply when I applied to be a White House fellow under President Obama, and then certainly when I decided that I wanted to run for Congress. So I just will share that, and then I'll look forward to the Q&A, because I think that I've already talked for enough minutes.
Not true, but I appreciate that. Representative Buffalo.
Nito Shadzi Nakbaga O Marashi Mia Adasheds Mabe Sigids Mazigidads Nakbaga O. Hello, good people, and I'm honored to be in this virtual space, and I try to hold myself accountable by practicing our Hidatsa language. I'm not an expert by any means, but still learning, and just so happy to be here in the space with all of you. I'm coming to you via Zoom, Zoomified, as she mentioned earlier, from the original homelands of the Dakota people, and after the 1800s, the Anishinaabe people here in the Red River Valley of Fargo, North Dakota. Currently, I'm serving a 4-year term in the State House of Representatives here in North Dakota. We're a little bit unique in that we do not meet every year for our legislative sessions, so we're coming off of our interim committee year. We'll be meeting with legislative management next month to go over all of the work that the interim committees have done throughout this past year. And then we're gearing up for our legislative session in January. In the last legislative session, I sat on the interim judiciary committee and the last legislative session, which was my first year. I was a freshman. I sat on the Judiciary Committee and the Agriculture Committee, and then during this interim, I sat on the Interim Judiciary Committee. I am still learning so much. I currently am the only Native American woman currently serving in the state legislature, and we're hoping to change that. We have 3 awesome Native American women candidates who are running in the state legislature. 2 of them are from my tribal nation, the Mandan, Hidatsa, and Arikara Nation. One is running for Senate, and the other is running for House. Just to give you a little idea of the political landscape in North Dakota, we don't have a Democratic nonpartisan league representation west of the Missouri River, which is west of Bismarck. And there's only 25 of us out of 141. So we're kind of a sliver of representation. In terms of women representation, we're still barely under 25%. So we have a lot of work to do, and we're hoping to change a lot of that representation in this upcoming election. The 3rd Native American woman candidate is from West Fargo here, a neighbor, and she is a member of the Turtle Mountain Band of Chippewa. And so we're pretty excited to have these 3 women running, and we're hoping that there will be a shift. We also have a lot of women running in North Dakota for State House and State Senate. And we also have a lot of exciting down ballot races too, including our county commission. And we also had in the June election, the first time using approval voting, and we were able to get a woman elected into the city commission here in Fargo. So that's been pretty exciting. A little bit about my story and my background is I grew up in Mandaree, which is on the Fort Berthold Indian Reservation. And at a young age, I saw things that needed to be fixed. And naturally, as a big sister, I guess have that gene or that characteristic to want to stand up for my younger siblings and to protect them. And oftentimes I found myself even trying to protect my 3 older brothers as well. I grew up in a 4-bedroom house with 10 of us, also raised by a single mother. My dad was stationed in Minot at the Air Force Base, and that's how he met my mom. They were both horse people. And so I grew up with 3 older brothers, 3 younger sisters, and 2 older girl first cousins that my mom raised and was able to help get them out of the foster care system. And so I mentioned I saw things that needed to be fixed at a young age. I was 10. One of my younger sisters was misdiagnosed with a health condition at our local field clinic. And that really prompted me to set out on a journey to want to become a medical doctor and return home and fix things so that no one else would have to experience what we experienced, because we had almost lost my sister when she was 5, and that was really scary. And so then I had applied and attended Indians into Medicine at University of North Dakota in Grand Forks every summer, 7th grade through 12th grade. Went on to be pre-med in college, but then found that I couldn't work on cadavers. That was a very life-changing thing for me. And so kind of shifted in a direction towards policy change. And in my policy work in Master of Public Health, one thing that really resonated with me was the idea or the fact that poor health is a result of poor policy, or through policy, we have an opportunity to improve lives. So that's kind of at the heart of why I ran for office, and really what keeps me going and trying to find equity for not only Native Americans, because I do represent a district that is not does not have an Indian reservation within it, but we do know that a lot of our Native population does live now in what is considered urban areas. But so yeah, that's just a little bit about myself, and then I guess I will turn it over to the facilitator. Madzigidads, and thank you for having me.
Thank you. Tribal Advisor Snyder.
Thank you. And just before I start, I apologize if it looks like I'm reading, but I have a trick because I actually do have crippling speaking anxiety, and I've got this trick and developed this trick during my time at NCAI. So everything is written down, so I apologize in advance. But this is how I navigate being in a public space and doing a lot of public speaking. So thank you, everyone. And thank you for inviting me to the discussion, and it's both my honor and pleasure to be here with my UCLA law colleagues and also my esteemed co-panelists. Again, my name is Christina Snyder, and I'm a member of the Dry Creek Rancheria Band of Pomo Indians and the Tribal Advisor for Governor Gavin Newsom. As we get started, I'd also like to acknowledge that I'm joining you from the original homelands of the Patwin peoples here in West Sacramento. For this presentation, again, we were asked to share some of our stories and how they influence our work in political spaces. My path to this position is really, as with my co-panelists, a very personal experience. And for me, it's something that's kind of difficult to talk about. So I think I'm gonna just go over what my role is and how we're kind of working in California, and then get to my personal story, just in case I end up ruining the mood of this panel. So I think it's incredibly valuable for other Native people to hear our stories, because I think that being a Native person in this world, and then in particularly in this work, can be incredibly lonely. And if just one other Native person hears my story and feels less alone, I feel like it's worth you all seeing me kind of go through a little bit on this webinar. So as you've heard, I currently serve in the role of tribal advisor to the governor, which is required to be a member of the California tribe under statute. The role, along with the office of the tribal advisor, which sits in the governor's office, was originally created by Governor Jerry Brown in 2011 and was later codified in 2018. So it's a permanent position now. The role was created at the request of tribal leaders who felt that there was not enough meaningful tribal input or direct engagement with the governor or the highest authorities of the state. So they felt that they were not getting the kind of connection to secretary level decision makers to be able to influence policies that directly affect California tribes. And just for context, for those of you who are unaware, because of how tribal lands and the history here played out in California, there are 18 unratified treaties that would have promised, larger swaths of jurisdiction and lands, and they all went unratified under a order of secrecy in Congress for some time, until they accidentally got found by a clerk. So there's a bit of pretty much everything the state does has an impact on Native communities, because a lot of Native communities live off reservation, and then that layered with PL 280 authorities means that the state actually has kind of a lot of impact, regardless of whether they take those, the impacts to Native communities into account or not. So in my role, I advise the governor on all things Native, and then also propose, develop, and implement administration-wide initiatives related to tribal populations. I also facilitate consultation and communication and oversee that equivalent at administration-wide at agencies, departments, everything. And then also sit as a cabinet level official that kind of reaches throughout all of the administration to help advise on these issues. So the role really has a lot of influence on tribal state initiatives and partnerships overseen in California. And because whoever sits in this role has to be from a California tribe, those that serve in the role feel a unique obligation to our communities to ensure that the initiatives will work long term. I think in serving in this role, it's been, and I think that probably everybody on this panel would probably agree that there's a lot of education that needs to happen. And so what I found is the most effective way to be, to get things done is to have just an enormous amount of empathy for decision makers, because of, you tend to have the same conversations over and over to the point of exhaustion. And sometimes those conversations are benign, like it's just, reiterating how many tribes are in the state, reiterating that there's jurisdictional authority, reiterating that there's differences between, tribal organizations and tribes and California Native people. But sometimes those conversations can feel intrusive or offensive. And so in doing this work, part of how I see my role is to understand that most people are not intentionally trying to do the wrong thing. I think most people think they're doing the right thing when they enter policy-making spaces. So I see my job more as giving these decision makers the tools they need to incorporate Native experiences and perspectives into their understanding, so that they can better decide what is the right thing with an awareness of potential views and impacts to Native communities. And if those decision makers are aware of the negative impacts and act in a way that is in clear defiance of those viewpoints, I think it's an easier way to spot who is actively working against Native interests, since they knew better and then still did wrong by Native communities. So I'm gonna go a bit now into how I got into this space. And I think I'm happy to go into more detail about the Newsom administration and some of the initiatives that have been framed by this kind of lens. If folks are interested in that in the Q&A. But I'll just go into a bit of how I got into this place. And also, my role is a bit distinct from the other panelists because I'm an appointee to an elected official. So I support the work of an elected official insofar as it's aligned with his policy priorities for tribes. Really how I got here was unplanned. I grew up in the 90s in Southern California, so things felt a little bit like Pleasantville, I think, when I was growing up. But my story really begins and continues with my mother, who grew up as a Native American child in a neighborhood where segregation was alive and well, and spent her summers up on our reservation picking plums with all of the cousins under the supervision of my great-grandma, Elizabeth Dollar, who would tell them the stories of their people during their downtime. And those are the stories that include all the good stuff about Coyote and not the watered down ones that you can probably Google or see in books. For lots of circumstances that you can probably imagine, my mom spent most of her childhood taking care of her family, including foster youth that were in her home. And when she was 18, she was able to get an entry-level job with LA County and finally had a chance to move out of her childhood home, eventually working to pay her way through UCLA to graduate with an English degree in her late 20s. So I am actually a third generation Bruin, so that is kind of the reason why it wasn't really even a question whether I wanted or I was gonna go to UCLA if I got in. My mom worked tirelessly at her job, and she made it look effortless, adhering to the highest ethical standards. And by the end of her career, she was actually chief fiscal officer for LA County. During this time, she also raised me and my brother, teaching us to be proud of our heritage and telling us those Coyote stories, but also really emphasizing that we need to guard that heritage closely as our birthright, while shielding us from some of the worst problems, including racism and substance abuse that her family continued to deal with. When she was 50, my mother was diagnosed with leukemia, and by 2007, at the age of 56, she passed away. Throughout her life, she was a source of stability and strength for everyone around her, and always saw the best in people, even when society had deserted them. She was also fiercely protective of us and our culture, and made sure we knew where we came from and what it meant to be that we were Pomo and we're still here. She was truly one of a kind. And I think in a way that, because I know I'll never meet anyone quite like her, I've tried to be the person that she was, to be strong for others and to stand up for what's right, even when it feels like the bullies are winning. When she passed, I had just turned 20, and like most people that age, I had no idea what I was doing. And looking back, I can see that I was kind of in a complete free fall. I was pretty much constantly ashamed that I wasn't being the person I knew I could be. And that feeling was just really crippling. Just getting to graduation at UCLA without dropping out seemed like a major accomplishment at the time, just because it was something I could point to that I was moving forward. Little did I know that I had graduated into one of the biggest recessions in recent history, which I think a lot of people who are 2020 graduates are now experiencing and can relate to. Decent entry-level jobs used to be guaranteed for college graduates, but then when I graduated, you basically had to know someone to even get your foot in the door. So while I'd been just busy trying to survive and get a degree and just make it through college, the rules of engagement had basically changed. I ended up taking some downtime after graduation to figure things out, and took the LSAT and had basically the perspective of, I'll try this. If it works and it's right, I'll do it. And so when my scores were good, I was like, okay, well, I'll apply. When I applied and then, got into UCLA law and had that little dance you do when you know that your body feels something is right, I had, there was no question that I was going to go there. But I also, at the time, had zero idea that I was walking into one of the premier institutions for tribal law and policy. I just knew I wanted to make a difference. But growing up as a California Native American in greater Los Angeles County, you really feel invisible. And I felt strongly that as California natives, we shouldn't have the burden of explaining ourselves to everyone just because California textbooks wrote us out of existence with the discovery of gold. So I basically talked to everybody about this. Lauren actually is the reason I started getting connected to things, because, you know, at a party I mentioned that I was Native, and she introduced me to NALSA and everything, and then ended up getting pointed in the direction of Carol Goldberg and Professor Riley to learn more about how I could even navigate this. So for me, I learned that I had a real passion for this work, and it meant that I wanted to learn more about and take every opportunity to learn more and take advantage of that, and take those opportunities. And so because I didn't have my mom at the time, I ended up bugging a lot of people and cold calling and asking for just guidance from a lot of people that I probably would have been too intimidated to ask for help for. But in return, I gained a lot of close friends, trusted advisors, and also you know, got really warm relations with my relatives along the way. And so also along the way, and through sheer luck, I've gotten to a point where I've gotten to experience more of my culture, hear my great grandma speak her story of survival in her own language, and have just really kind of come full circle. So I wrote a lot more, but I feel like I'm at my time. So I'm gonna just say that, you know, I think that really the key here for me has been, you know, reaching out, even if it feels intimidating and uncomfortable, to people that you look up to in the Native community, and then also turning around and providing that support to other Native people has just been really key. We're at a place where we have just record numbers of folks running for office, like all of my esteemed co-panelists. And so I really think that we're in a wonderful place of at least Native people at least elbowing their way in, and the rest of us that are starting to get in, reaching back and making sure that other folks can make it. So I'll stop. I'm at my time. I'm sorry if I went over. Thank you for having me. Yowie.
Not at all. You can go all day. Oh, look, and there is candidate Jordan. We're so happy to have you. Would you like to tell us a little bit about you and your story?
Yes, I'd love to, and thanks everyone for sharing your stories. It's beautiful to hear. I'm going to have to be very short. I'm actually in the middle of my tour. I'm actually on the road today, so I have to get to my next event. But I wanted to share just my pride amongst this team here. You know, we're all sisters and we're all related. We're all fighting for the greater good. And, you know, for me, as if my grandmother were alive today, she would just say how incredibly important it is for all of us to, you know, act as separate sovereigns, but be sovereign in our everyday being, you know, from acknowledging the fact that we come from this great inheritance, and fighting for our land rights and fighting for water rights, fighting for the rights of nature, and, you know, continuing to be a voice for all people, because everyone benefits from our leadership. Everyone benefits from our ambassadorial relationship that we have to this land, and it's extremely important. So I've learned a great deal from my elders. Many are women who are just powerful voices. Just a sec, I'm getting some.
So sorry, we have a little bit of an echo.
Okay, hopefully that's
good.
better. Can you hear me okay? Thanks. I'm actually here in the backcountry and driving through these mountains, so it's kind of hectic, but yeah, so, you know, my whole life path is basically based off of a legacy of leaders. All of my relatives are great chiefs of the Pacific Northwest, you know, men and women. My grandmother, who was Lucy Covington, you know, she was a woman chief, and, you know, she was really one who guided me in so many ways. And I'll tell you that when you have a formidable champion for sovereignty, who fought for, you know, everyone's rights for independence, and opportunity. It's really a beautiful path to take on. And she would always tell me that these fights will always continue, the battles will always continue, the conversations will always continue. And that's why we have to push our young people to take on education from all angles and continue to explore and lead. So I'm grateful that we can be in these positions where we're pushing conversations forward, we're breaking glass ceilings, we're pushing our positions in places where, you know, we so much as have the audacity to be in these rooms. Because we've been plagued by a society that has heavily wanted to colonize our people, wanted to strip us of our culture and our language, our way of being. But gratefully, there are those of us who are pushing back in a way that is honest, is peaceful, it's very graceful. And now we're positioning ourselves to be leaders of this country, to actually pull our country back together in this healing process. And it's more about me, the way I feel moving into politics is really about healing the country. It's really about getting back into our rightful place as leaders, as a voice for humanity and as a voice for nature, being the ambassadors of peace. Not so much about the past experiences, because those past experiences do have their rightful place. They've taught us so much. I've learned a lot from my grandfathers and grandmothers who were frontline leaders and serving in all of these great positions, from wars and battles, and taking that from the land now to the courts, and how many battles we've taken on and won even in the courts. And it's an economic battle now today. We have an opportunity to be a leader with the tribes, working with our U.S. economy. And that's really, what I see here is ensuring that tribes can be absolutely, economically sovereign, and position ourselves to be a leader in this conversation when it comes down to fixing our U.S. economy, being a leader globally, ensuring we're always a leader at that table internationally. So I definitely see that, as long as we keep pushing, as long as we keep supporting each other, that, these conversations will certainly benefit above and beyond the tribal community, but really will benefit everyone in this country and across the world, because they are waiting for Indigenous leadership like ours. They're waiting for Indigenous women, to rise up, even knowing that we've been plagued by, the ills of our society, knowing that, we still have women who are going missing, and are women who are often, becoming part of a statistic that isn't, a statistic we can be proud of. So again, we still have work to do, but I will tell you, with my own plight, everything that I've worked hard for, it wouldn't have been successful if it weren't by the encouragement of my own elders. Education, all that, my experience aside, it is always about really walking this path with our ancestors, and it will always come back to that. We are all serving out our purpose, and that is really very powerful. So I will just say that much, and I'm told we have questions. I think I'd like to take some questions more than speaking to my story.
Yes, thank you. I'm so glad you could join us. I know you have to jump off soon, and Professor Riley also, but Professor Riley, before you go, I wanted to give the chance in case you had any closing words or questions before you had to leave.
Thank you so much, Lauren. I just wanted to thank you all so much for being here and for sharing your stories. And I think they resonate with me. I have probably similar stories to some of you in many respects. And it's just, it's unbelievably inspiring. And I know that there are so many people out there who are watching this who are being inspired by you. And I'm inspired by all of you. And I am just delighted that you were here with us today. So I will stop talking. I'll let our audience talk. And thank you all again. Chimigwech. Thanks.
Thank you. Yes, and I see we're getting questions in the questions box, so please keep them coming. But before we get there, I wanted to take the prerogative and ask the first question. I'm really struck by many of the themes that came up, but one about visibility and the power of being seen. I'm struck by the fact that at least in regards to many of your families and in my family, the prospect of a female leader is not unique. It's not revolutionary. In fact, it is very much the norm. and yet you're all stepping into spaces where it is very unique. I must say, you know, personally, I had no idea how invisible I felt until I saw your election, Representative Davids. And it was this moment that it was like, oh my gosh, I didn't even know that I wasn't being represented until I was. And so I wonder if you could speak to what it's like stepping into these spaces that are very much new for you and the Indigenous people that you end up representing, even though they are not technically part of your constituency.
Well, that feels like a big question. So I think there's a couple of things I would say to that. First of all, I was blown away to learn that we had never had a Native woman in Congress before. And it probably is because of what you were saying about, I mean, I just know so many amazing Native women who are smart, who are driven, who are amazing leaders, who are really in a lot of different ways the glue that holds things together. And so I think in some ways, I think that's part of like why, even though in the mainstream, it seems like this thing that people, you know, especially in Kansas, I think a lot of people were like surprised. I've flipped a seat in Kansas, and you know, it's I think some people don't know even which red rectangle we are in the middle of the country. And so, you know, I think that I think the way it feels when you're in it, certainly I know what it feels like to feel invisible in a lot of different scenarios and ways, or to feel small, or to feel I don't, in some ways just like squished by everything all the time. And you know, when you're kind of like making your way through. So there are a couple of pieces that are very strange about this experience. In some ways it feels like something needed to be done. Our representative wasn't representing us very well, and we needed to change that. I had actually asked a couple of other people to run for the office first, and then was like, wait, why am I asking other people when, you know, I'm just as qualified. I have a law degree, I have federal experience. And so I think that's, I mean, like, you want something done, Native women are going to show up and get it done. And so I think there's a piece of it that's kind of like, of course, this is what's happening. And it just so happens to be that now in mainstream, people are seeing this more and more. But at the same time, I think there's probably pieces of it that, like, I don't know at what point I'll process what this experience is like, to serve alongside Deb in Congress, to be one of the first 2 Native women in Congress, partly because it never should have been that we're in 2018 before that happened. And so I think there's pieces of it that involve just, I did an interview the other day with a radio station here in the Kansas City area, and because of the Not Invisible Act, and some of the other murdered and missing Indigenous women work that Congresswoman Holland and I have been working on, I got asked about it by a radio station that doesn't have, you know, it doesn't reach to the 4 tribal, you know, 4 tribal communities here in Kansas. It's really just the KC metro area. And I remember thinking, like, this is really important. It's really important that people who are not directly impacted by the murdered and missing Indigenous women crisis are asking about it, or wanting to know, like, just wanting to know about it and seeing that progress is being made. And that's really, I think, one of the things that I can see in the here and now that feels like it matters. Sharice going to say something.
Yeah. Representative
I'd love to
Paulette?
hear from the others.
Yeah, I mean, gosh, so much to say in such little amount of time, but yeah, you know, I mentioned I'm the only Native American woman currently serving in our state legislature. I did run for office in 2016 for the first time ever, and it was in a statewide race, and it was for insurance commissioner. And I remember thinking back then, you know, I just kind of wanted to get involved with like Native vote and things, and then next thing you knew, I was running in a statewide race with 2 other Native Americans. And at that time, Mark Trahant was at UND, and he was doing a lot of research and shared with us that we were actually making history, and we were like, what, are you serious? You know, and he said, yeah, you know, no, in no state ever across the United States in 2016 has there ever been 3 Native Americans on a statewide ticket, you know, running for statewide office. So that was interesting, you know, because we still felt like we were in a deficit, you know, like 3, you know, it's great, but there's so much more work that needs to be done, you know. And so it was super inspiring to see the amount of Native candidates in 2018, you know, even though we lost or we didn't win our races in 2016, it still was, there was still a lot of small victories along the way just by our presence. Although towards the end of our campaigns, you know, what was happening in Standing Rock kind of became front and center when we were doing town halls across the state. And Mark Trahant also did a small statewide tour with us, you know, documenting our experiences. But, you know, oftentimes towards the end of that campaign trail or campaign season in 2016 in our statewide races, a lot of times we were asked the question of like, were you at the camps? You know, people were more concerned about that issue versus what our platforms were. For insurance commissioner, Chase Iron Eyes was running for U.S. House, and Marlo Hunt Bobrun, both of them from Standing Rock. She was running for Public Service Commission. But, you know, again, even though we didn't win those particular races, I was still left so inspired. You know, the day after the election, I remember researching all day, trying to figure out, you know, how can I move this work forward? You know, because a lot of my older first cousins, it was their first time voting ever, you know, and so, and I know that story is not unique. And so just the amount of people who supported us, non-Native and Native across the state, in all of the personal stories that they shared with us, I felt like I had this huge responsibility to still do something with that, you know. I remember Googling, trying to find different ways to continue to learn in this area. And one thing that came up was the Roots Camp, I believe it was called, by Wellstone Action, and it was held like a couple weeks after the November 2016 election out in DC. And so I ended up making my way out there and attended and learned so much. They called it an unconference, and ran into Lieutenant Governor Peggy Flanagan, and she was on a panel, and one of the panelists didn't show, and so she asked me to sit on the panel with her. You know, so it was just a really good support system, you know, being a part of being with others who are trying to still find ways to work towards bringing all of our communities together after the 2016 election. And so I feel that many of us we're going, you know, nonstop in trying to bring change to our communities and make sure that our voices were heard and are heard. Being in the state legislature has been interesting for me. I might have mentioned that we are matriarchal, matrilineal people as well, the Mandan, Hidatsa, and Arikara people. But if you come to our communities on the Fort Berthold Indian Reservation, oftentimes you'll find that women are sitting during a prayer and the men are standing. And so during our swearing into office ceremony, a colleague reached out to me who is non-Native but is familiar with our tribal customs, and she had asked the question, you know, are you going to sit during prayer? If so, let me know, and so we can let, you know, the powers that be, you know, let them know so they're not alarmed or don't know what you're doing, you know. And I said, sure, you know, that would be great if I could bring that into this space. And so that's what I did from that moment forward. And then by law, we are given 80 days to meet every other year for our legislative session. In my first session, we ran all the way up until we had four days to spare, but every single day when we would have our House floor session, you know, they open with a prayer and then they jump right into the Pledge of Allegiance. So that was something that I brought with me into that space, was sitting during prayer. And it wasn't to protest or even within our tribal customs, it's not to say that, you know, women are weak or anything like that, but it's actually quite the opposite, in saying that our men are our protectors, and we are, you know, we as women also have the gift of being life barriers or life givers too. So it's just a huge way to show the respect for one another, and still having that balance. And so that's something I brought into the state legislature with me, and still have continued to. And I did at one point, 2 weeks into our legislative session, have to send out an all you know, like all legislative email, kind of explaining what I'm doing, because even within our small corner of 15 Democrat nonpartisan leaguers in the House, you know, there were people kind of stirring, and you could feel the nervousness, like, you know, are you protesting? What are you doing? You know, but after sending that educational email out, I received a lot of positive responses. But also, aside from that, you know, I did choose to wear our tribal regalia when I got sworn in. And I remember having a conversation with one of my first cousins. Him and his partner drove up from Albuquerque. And so he's Hidatsa and Dene. And the night before getting sworn in December, we had this conversation. Have you thought about what you're gonna wear yet? And I was like, not really. I was thinking maybe a blazer, a medallion, shell earrings, or my dress, my elk tooth dress. And my cousin was like, well, you know, it is North Dakota, you are a freshman, kind of like, don't rock the boat yet, you know. But I then, you know, reached out to one of my really close sister friends that I grew up with from back home at Fort Berthold Indian Reservation, and she immediately said elk tooth dress. And so that was the direction I took. And later my first cousin was joking and said, and to think I was trying to, you know, talk you out of wearing your elk tooth dress, because we thought the safer thing for me in North Dakota would be, you know, something very, very more much on the conservative side, I guess you could say. So that's just a little bit about my experience. I don't want to take up too much airtime, but since I've been in the state legislature, though, I've had an enormous amount of people from all walks of life come in and want to visit the Capitol or sit with me. Different times I would post, you know, on my Facebook, please come sit with me on the floor, take in a House floor session. And I would get responses from different people saying, you know, they would message me and say, well, why are we sitting on the floor? Like, they thought literally the floor, and, you know, what are we protesting? And so it's been an adjustment and a transition for not only me, but my community, my supporters, on just adjusting to even the language that is used within the halls of the state legislature. So towards the end of the legislative session, they just left the ushers, you know, would just leave a chair behind my desk, because, you know, every day in the morning we would have to go to the ushers or the sergeant of arms and let them know, you know, who our visitors were going to be for that day, and if we needed one chair or two chairs. But it was a revolving door of people just wanting to come in and take in a legislative session. And very interesting to have people of the elderly age say that was the very first time they were ever in our state capitol, you know. So, and I also want to make reference again to our sister, Lieutenant Governor Peggy Flanagan, how she always says, you know, to widen the doors to the state capitol. And so that's something that we share also here in North Dakota, and just wanting to make sure that people know that they are welcome in the state capitol. So Madzigidads, thank you.
I believe Paulette Jordan had to sign off. She's got about 10,000 different, oh, she's still here, yay. Did you have any thoughts that you'd like to share? You're on mute.
Before I leave, I just wanted to thank you and share my regards to everyone. You know, we're all in very heated races. You know, being first Native American woman to serve in the U.S. Senate, I think this is where we all have to keep fighting to ensure that we're breaking down these barriers. So before I leave here, I just want to encourage everyone to get out and vote. And, you know, we have a lot of students I hear on this call, and, you know, there's so much work that can be done. There's so many great candidates on this call and representatives. And of course, you know, it really just is a matter of, regardless of what state you live in, finding the leader that you feel very passionate about and joining their cause. You know, we all have great movements in our states, and, you know, the ideas, the visions that we're promoting, you know, these are visions that are unlike any other candidate in this country. There is not one on the Republican side or the Democratic side or independent side that really speaks to the voice that we bring to the state capitals and to the US Capitol, which is, again, really the greatest difference. The Indigenous voice is so beautiful, so powerful. And if we can get more people to get behind the vision, the movement that we bring to this entire political conversation, this is what is going to change this nation, and this is what's going to change the conversations globally. So I am just grateful to be on this call, and thank you all for joining as well. And with that, I wish you all the best and send my prayers to each and every one of you. Thank you.
Likewise, we are so happy you could join us. Good luck. Well, we have some great questions that are coming in, and so I think I'm just gonna dive right into those. Mia's ripping it up. Working in US government means working in a system that wasn't created by or for Native people, and in fact designed to erase and marginalize Native communities. Can you share your thoughts about or your approach to building trust and accountability when working with non-Native elected officials?
Well, I recognize I'm the federal person here. It is a strange thing to be part of the federal government, you know, in this capacity, or even I remember when I was doing the White House Fellows Program, and I was at the Department of Transportation. So there's a couple of things that I would say to that. First of all, it is a very different thing walking into the various, like whether it's hearings or meetings or our caucus meetings, any of that, and speaking to members of Congress as a peer. And I think that that's, first of all, it's a weird thing to wrap your mind around, that, you know, every single one of us has one vote. Some people are, you know, chairs of committees or what, like all the different, like, you know, leadership positions that exist within the institution. But at the end of the day, we all walk onto the House floor and we all have one vote. And we all have the opportunity and in a lot of instances, the duty to inform and sometimes convince or try to hold off different policies or bills or whatever it is. And I think that one of the places where I've seen already, you know, having Deb and I in the room, it changes the conversation almost always. And I'm sure this is actually, in some ways, it's not that different, I imagine, at the state level government as well. First of all, how often people catch themselves when they realize that they just made some statement and completely erased Native people from the founding of the country, how this country came to be, like all the different ways that happens. And I think, Christina, when you said earlier that it's generally not animus. It's not like people are like out of some sort of malice are doing this. It's that as a country, we have not learned like the true long, complex history that we have. And I think that one of the things that I also, like, just us being in the room changes the conversation. The questions we ask, the comments we make, or points that we bring up. But then you stack on top of it that because of the work that I did prior to deciding to get into politics, you know, I got the chance to work on financing deals for tribal governments. I also got the chance to do community and economic development work at Thunder Valley in South Dakota on the Pine Ridge Reservation. And I learned a ton about the tribal-federal relationship, about like the legal underpinnings of treaty rights, of tribal sovereignty, of the role of Congress when it comes to the federal tribal relationship. And this is complex stuff. You know, I remember telling somebody once that federal Indian law is like con law on steroids. And sometimes there's the roid rage in there too. But it's complex stuff. And I just, you know, I remember a time where a bill about recognizing a tribe's land was up for a vote. It was coming up for a vote, and there were a bunch of people who didn't really understand what the bill was about, and there were some folks pushing back against it. Deb got up and spoke to the caucus, and I got up and spoke to the caucus about that Congress has plenary power over what happens as it pertains to the relationship between the federal government and tribes and tribal governments. And I talked about treaty rights, and that we have the opportunity in Congress right now to recognize a tribe's treaty rights. We have the opportunity right now to recognize the sovereignty that is inherent in tribes. And I think that the thing that I always hold on to when I'm trying to make arguments for folks as a member of Congress is that if I can get 4 or 5 members of Congress to change their mind, that could be the difference between getting a bill passed or not. And that's like again, a thing that's like really hard to wrap your mind around sometimes, but we ended up getting that bill passed. And I think 7 people came up to me after that caucus meeting and said, I'm glad you shared today. I had no idea. I'm planning on supporting the bill. And I think that that's like one instance, but there's lots of other ways. They're like changing the world. I feel like it's comprised of a million different smaller decisions every single day that people are making. Some of it is just sovereignty. I wonder what that means. And then the next time they hear something, and then the next. And so it could be that in 2 years from now, we see all kinds of stuff that is actually like percolating up right now. And I think that, you know, some of what I feel like being part of this institution is requires a recognition that sometimes I'll still feel invisible. And I often say that running for office, being an elected, is you can take whatever your lived experience is and just amplify it. It just amplifies everything. So it doesn't go away, but like learning to navigate that and manage it and really like reconcile. I think, I imagine folks, other folks have really spent time trying to reconcile, like, what is it to be a Native person and be a federal official or a state level official, or to like, I do think that that's something that takes a bit of time and internal work. I'd love to hear what.
I'm not answering the question, but I can from a state level. But I did want to say, because I've been thinking about this a lot over the past, you know, however long. But I think that, you know, Representative Davids is also very much, and I don't know if I'm allowed to say this, but, you know, I'm not working for you, so I'm going to say it anyway. But I think that she's very much underrepresenting the struggle as a freshman in Congress. for anybody. And so especially as like the first, you know, one of the two first Native women in Congress, it is so much about, you know, getting buy-in, getting trust, having people feel like you're not going to totally just like, you know, railroad them. And I really do want to commend Representative Davids for like the skill that I don't know if people are noticing, which demonstrates to me the skill that you have in navigating that and getting things done. So really good job.
Thank you. I appreciate that. But I would love to hear from the state perspective, what's that like, especially in a state like California. I know, Christina, you mentioned earlier some of the, I mean, there's a lot. California is a lot. And then as a state representative, and then specifically taking the seat that you took, yeah. I don't know.
Yeah, I would like to hear about that because it's a new position in a state that's really taken a very new approach to tribal relations. In particular, a state that, right from a Native person's perspective, is extremely hostile, but otherwise puts itself out in the world as being very progressive and liberal, and that tension is very real for Native people. And so you find yourself in a very, you know, at a unique intersection.
Yeah, thank you. I have a lot of thoughts, and I'll probably offend some people by saying this, but I agree, because California is one of those states where it's, sorry, all my colleagues, very left coast liberal, where we think we're the most liberal. And because of that, everybody's equal. Everybody, like, we have diversity, but we don't like call it out. And so I think that the invisibility here is particularly insidious because people are like, well, you are part of mainstream society, you're good, whatever. And so when you talk about the issues that we still have higher rates of missing and murdered Indigenous women here, we still have higher rates of poverty, of lack of broadband access, all of that, it literally does not occur to people because that's not their experience of California, which is pretty much limited to the coast or, you know, some of the major city centers where Native people tend to be largely invisible amongst, you know, large diverse populations. But with this role, I'll say that I have had the immense luck to be aligned with two governors that actually care about these issues and want to use their platform to elevate them. So my previous boss, Jerry Brown, actually used to talk about the genocide. He read The American Genocide, which is about the genocide of California Native Americans, and would talk about it in his speeches. He's less of a shiny celebrity than Newsom, so people just kind of were like, oh yeah, okay, climate change, nuclear obliteration, genocide, okay, good. But with Newsom, he's brought in this this fresh perspective and really cares about doing right by Native people. So part of when we first started having these discussions, it was like insane to him that nobody had ever apologized for the depredations that happened here in California, and that the first governor actually said that there will be a war against the Native people until they're, you know, everybody's gone. And for him, it was really important to elevate these issues and get behind them. And so I think, in my view, that has been what's made it easier for me to be able to further these priorities and have those connections, because we have this, and I don't know if you guys have it in other states, but we have this phenomenon where everybody wants to be on the good side of the governor. So if he says something, everybody will do stuff that is aligned sort of with that. So the legislature, we've had the first California Native American in history is on our legislature right now, Assemblymember James Ramos from San Manuel. Huge. And in this year in COVID, where we're prioritizing just COVID bills, he got 5 bills of substance. Don't hold me to that because I just said 5, but it's around 5. I think it's 4, 3, 4. I'll go look. But he got major bills of substance on Native voting rights, PL 280 and missing and murdered issues, and cultural resource protection at a minimum. And so there's all of this crazy movement right now because everybody, first of all, can't look away because the governor now said it publicly and endorsed this position that is, you know, fact. It happened. But also people want to do more and do better because as Representative Davids mentioned, we've done such a good job of obliterating from everybody's collective consciousness that Native people were here first and still are here, that even the consciousness of people who want to do right, there's no room for Native people. So, you know, you have in policy circles, if you're ever wanting to do more or do better, you can't get any traction because everybody doesn't think you're there. So that's kind of probably some all over the place answer, but that's kind of how things are here. Is like, I think for me, getting those alliances, moving forward on progressive policy platforms has been easier because of the kind of allies that we have here, which shouldn't honestly have to be the case. You shouldn't have to go find someone who has power and privilege to elevate these issues, but we're not there yet. So soon.
Thank you. Please, please.
Yeah, I would like to add real quick. I know we have probably like 2 minutes left, but I can talk really fast. No, just kidding. In North Dakota, you know, after you get elected, you get sworn in December 3rd, and then the following month, the session starts, but you have 2 weeks, approximately 2 weeks to get your bill drafts together. And so what that means is it's basically speed networking, especially, you know, it's to begin with, you're in an uphill climb in a red state, a trifecta such as North Dakota. And I mentioned the sliver of representation Democrat nonpartisan leaguers have within our state legislature. We haven't had a Democrat nonpartisan leaguer in a statewide office, I think from as far back as the 80s, you know, so we still have a lot of work to do. You know, Senator Heidi Heitkamp was our shining star. And so we're still trying to continue to build a strong foundation to get more people elected into state office here in North Dakota. But literally we had to go through as freshmen a speed networking to, once you get your bill draft set, you know, through legislative council, then you're tasked with finding co-sponsors. And as a Democrat nonpartisan leaguer in North Dakota, which is a trifecta where the governor, the majority state senate, state house is held by the Republican Party, it's best to have more Republicans sign off on your bills. You know, so a lot of my bills, I had the opportunity to introduce 8 pieces of legislation. 7 of them passed. The one piece of legislation that did not pass was a child care assistance bill. And so it was really trying to get the state median income level reinstated back to what it was in 2016 before it got cut. And when that cut happened in 2016, 890 children were kicked off of child care assistance. And so we know that the importance and the connection between child care assistance and being successful in the workforce, you know, and to provide public service when people need it. And so the other bills were a package of bills that we put together. Well, actually it was given to me from our local task force. We formed a local task force here in Fargo within the week of the horrific, brutal murder of the late Savannah LaFontaine Graywind here in Fargo. She was 8 months along in her pregnancy, and many of us moms found ourselves on the front lines looking for her. And the last day of the search, before the last day of the search, I was asked by 2 elder women from the Turtle Mountain Band of Chippewa to lead the search on that Sunday, which also happened to be my birthday. So it's something that I won't ever forget, you know, and so we constantly find ways to advocate for the families and to make sure that their voices are front and center, a part of this work. But it's a huge undertaking because there's a lot of trauma there that we have to deal with as a community and as advocates and newbies to that arena or to that circle in advocacy for violence against women. And so we didn't know what we were doing, so to speak. We tried to reach out to national organizations so they could come and help us fend off media inquiries and all other sorts of things to help protect that particular family. But you know, we had to learn as we went and did the best we could. But so after we had our local task force formed, they gave me their wish list of bills that they wanted to see implemented in our legislative session. And so that's what I took with me to Bismarck. It was a package of bills, 6 of them. And afterwards, they told me that they said they would have been happy if just one of those bills got passed, and I was like, wow, you guys should have told me at the front end, because I was like, 6 bills, all right, let's do this, It was, but again, tapping into existing structures. So I wasn't reinventing the wheel. And so there were 2 MMIP. We changed it to P for people to include all genders. And I don't think North Dakota realizes how much of a progressive thing they did in doing that, And so law enforcement training regarding missing and murdered Indigenous people, which will be administered by the Human Trafficking Commission, but you can catch all those bills on legis.nd.gov. Aside from that package of 6 bills that focused on MMIP, human trafficking prevention and awareness for schools, hotels, resolution urging Congress to pass Savannah's Act, comprehensive study looking at the cross-section between MMIP cases and human trafficking. And so aside from that package of 6, then there was this bill that we put forward for Native youth, so that it would prohibit any school board across the state of North Dakota from stopping or not allowing Native youth to wear eagle feather, eagle plume at their high school graduation, which was sad in the same respect, and so really what was important for me was the support system from other state legislatures. Kevin Killer, looking at his bill drafts, what he did in South Dakota on the same type of issue. Representative Pankawee Victors from Kansas also. And I actually was an intern for her in 2014 and learned so much. Like, it was so inspiring to see a young Native woman holding her ground in a state legislature. And I remember working on a resolution with her and her ancestor, Chief Standing Bear, and learning the history of how he was, trying to travel across what was state lines at the time to bring his deceased son back home. It was just, striking to learn of that history, that rich history, and that not only impacted her particular family, community, tribe, but the entire country, and so to not be considered a human being is something that we still face today in North Dakota or in the Dakotas in fighting for justice. But one thing I wanted to mention in that first question about building trust amongst non-Native leaders, one thing I got thrown into right away was in that 2-week window of speed networking to find bill sponsors before the deadline. There, I got bombarded with other asks from other non-Native state legislators who were missing the boat on tribal consultation, and I would politely ask, well, this sounds great, but have you consulted with the tribe yet? No, we're going to do that after we find the funding. And I was like, well, that's a little backwards, and so kind of to Christina's point that maybe people just are not aware, or are not intentionally trying to be malicious, but still very interesting to have those conversations and constantly repeat yourself in a good way, and then try to be the connector and find out that the tribal nation had no idea that elected officials wanted to put a ferry through tribal lands, and the thing is too, there's some complex fights happening in North Dakota with different tribal nations, specifically the tribal nation that I'm a part of, or I'm a citizen of the Mandan, Hidatsa, and Arikara Nation, is the water, the lands. 94% of our agricultural lands was flooded in the early 1950s through the Pick-Sloan Act, which brought the Garrison Dam into fruition that provided flood control for our state capital, our capital city of Bismarck. And so the land that's still underwater, there's a fight over mineral rights between the state of North Dakota and our tribal nation, the Mandan, Hidatsa, and Arikara Nation. And there's so much stories to go along with that, but currently, our state of North Dakota believes they own the water, they own the Missouri River, so it's very interesting to hear the different conversations. So that's all I will add. Thank you for your time. Madzigidads. I hope I did a good job in summarizing that.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, I can't believe we're already at time. So many more questions, but that's just the nature of this topic, because you're trailblazers leading us into a really bright new world that makes me excited for future generations. I can't thank you enough for joining us, for sharing your expertise, for being the courageous leaders that you are, even though you're merely following in the footsteps of the leaders before you. We see you. We are so grateful that you're out there doing that, and we are especially grateful for your time today. Thank you to all of our attendees for joining us, including staying time over. I send my warm regards and wish safety and health for you and your family wherever you may be. Thank you all so much.